Black janitor noticed symptoms. Everyone else ignored and ended up saving the life of a millionaire CEO. The executive elevator at Manhattan Business Tower had never stopped on the 25th floor at 3 o'clock in the morning. But there stood James Washington, night janitor for 15 years, watching through the tinted glass of the boardroom as a woman collapsed onto the mahogany table that cost more than his annual salary. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries and one of the most powerful women in the country, was clearly in trouble. Her face was contorted with pain. Her left arm hung limply, and when she tried to speak on the phone, her words came out slurred and incomprehensible. James recognized the signs immediately, a stroke in progress. At 52, James had learned medicine the hard way. His wife Dorothy had been a nurse specializing in neurology for 20 years before she died in an accident 5 years ago. During their decades of marriage, she had turned every dinner into an emergency medicine class, insisting that medical knowledge saved lives regardless of who you were. James hesitated for a second. He was the invisible janitor who cleaned the Jinda offices after the executives left. Victoria Sterling was the woman whose face graced business magazines, who moved billions with a simple email. Their worlds never crossed except when she occasionally ignored him completely in rare hallway encounters. But Dorothy always said that neurological symptoms didn't respect social class or skin color. James opened the conference room door. Ms. Sterling, you're having a stroke. Don't try to talk. Just listen to me. His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had watched Dorothy guide families through medical crisis for 2 decades. Victoria tried to protest, but the words came out even more garbled. Panic began to take hold of her eyes when she realized that something was terribly wrong. James was already dialing 911 as he positioned Victoria to prevent further neurological damage. Ambulance to the Manhattan Tower, 25th floor. Female patient, mid-40s, presenting with classic stroke symptoms. Facial paralysis, weakness in left arm, slurred speech. Symptoms began approximately 5 minutes ago. The 911 operator was surprised by the medical accuracy of someone who identified himself as a janitor. But James continued to provide clinical information with the ease of a healthcare professional. When the paramedics arrived, they found Victoria stabilized in the correct position, with James providing a detailed account of her symptoms and progression. One of the paramedics whispered to his colleague, "This guy knows more about neurology than half the nurses I know." At the hospital, while Victoria received the treatment that would save her life, James returned to work as if nothing had happened. After all, he was just the night janitor, the invisible man who kept the building running while the powerful slept in their mansions. What James didn't know was that this night would change his life in ways even Dorothy couldn't have predicted. And what Victoria Sterling would discover about prejudice, medicine, and the true definition of competence would rewrite everything she thought she knew about human value. If you're following this story of how knowledge can break down barriers that money builds, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of humanity would expose a conspiracy that threatened not only Victoria's life, but the entire power structure she represented. The next morning, James arrived at work expecting life to return to normal. But he found an unpleasant surprise waiting for him in the employee locker room, a formal warning note on his locker. Inappropriate use of the executive elevator during work hours. Unauthorized access to corporate facilities after hours. The signature belonged to Wilson Carter, security manager and the kind of man who measured his own worth by his power to make other people's lives miserable. James folded the paper calmly. 15 years of impeccable work, never a complaint. And now he was being punished for saving the CEO's life. The irony was not lost on him. In the corporate world, even doing the right thing could be turned into a crime. When you were the wrong man doing it. What really bothered James wasn't the warning itself, but the timing. How did Carter find out about the previous night's events so quickly? The hospital maintained medical confidentiality, and the paramedics had no reason to report details to the company. Someone was watching Victoria Sterling's movements very closely. During the morning shift, James discreetly observed the movement on the 25th floor. Dr. Patterson, Victoria's personal physician, arrived 2 hours later than usual with an expression that mixed irritation and what looked like genuine panic. Through the glass doors, James saw a heated discussion between the doctor and Wilson Carter. Dorothy's memory came back to her like a blow. "Jammy," she used to say when they reviewed complex cases over dinner. When neurological symptoms appear suddenly in stressed executives, the first question should never be, "Why now?" but rather, "Who benefits if this person can no longer work?" James had assumed that Victoria's stroke was the result of stress and corporate pressure. But the tense conversation between Carter and Dr. Patterson planted a seed of doubt that Dorothy would have recognized immediately. Competent doctors didn't panic when patients survived medical emergencies. They celebrated. That afternoon, James received an unexpected call. Victoria Sterling wanted to see him in her office. When he arrived on the 25th floor, he found the CEO looking much better, but with an inquiring look that had not been present the night before. "James, correct?" Victoria gestured for him to sit in the chair across from her desk. "I want to thank you personally for what you did last night." The doctor said, "Your quick action saved my life." "I only did what any decent person would do, Miss Sterling." Victoria studied his face with growing interest. "The paramedics were impressed with your medical knowledge. Where did you learn about neurological symptoms?" James hesitated. Talking about Dorothy always hurt, but there was something in Victoria's expression that suggested the question wasn't just polite. "My wife was a nurse specializing in neurology. 20 years at Chicago General Hospital. She taught me how to recognize emergency signs. She died in an accident 5 years ago." Victoria's expression softened genuinely. "I'm sorry for your loss." She paused as if weighing her next words carefully. "James, can I ask you a strange question? In your informal medical opinion, did my symptoms yesterday seem natural?" The question caught James off guard. Victoria Sterling, one of the most powerful women in the country, was asking a janitor for his medical opinion on her own condition. Even more intriguing, she was phrasing the question as if she suspected something wasn't right. "With all due respect, Miss Sterling, this is something you should discuss with your personal physician." "I have." Her response came too quickly, laden with barely concealed frustration. Dr. Patterson said it was executive stress. He prescribed sedatives and recommended a vacation. James felt a familiar chill. Dorothy always said that competent doctors investigated causes of strokes in young patients as if their lives depended on it, because they did. Prescribing sedatives to someone who had just had a neurological event was not only inappropriate, it was potentially criminal. "Mrs. Sterling," James said carefully, "did your wife ever mention similar symptoms before yesterday?" Victoria froze. "How did you stroke in a person in their 40s rarely happens out of the blue. There are usually warning signs that go unnoticed or are misinterpreted." Silence stretched between them as Victoria processed the implication. Finally, she nodded slowly. Persistent headaches, occasional dizziness, episodes of mental confusion that Dr. Patterson attributed to work pressure. James kept his expression neutral, but internally Dorothy was screaming alarms. Any competent neurologist would have ordered detailed tests in light of those symptoms. The fact that Dr. Patterson had ignored them meant one of two things: gross medical incompetence or something deliberately sinister. When James left Victoria's office 15 minutes later, Wilson Carter was waiting in the hallway, making a point. of being seen observing the meeting. The smile he directed at James contained a thinly veiled threat, as if to say, "We know you're meddling where you shouldn't be." That night, as James cleaned up the empty offices, something Dorothy always insisted on echoed in his mind. "Jamie, there are no coincidences in medicine. When strange patterns appear, there's always someone behind them creating those patterns." What if Victoria Sterling hadn't simply had a stress-induced stroke? What if someone was deliberately putting her health at risk? James thought about the warning in his locker, the argument between Carter and Dr. Patterson, the way they both seemed to know too much about events that should have been confidential. For 15 years, James had been the invisible man, the janitor no one noticed. But invisibility, he was beginning to realize, could be the most powerful weapon against people who thought themselves untouchable, especially when those people completely underestimated what a simple man was capable of observing, understanding, and if necessary, exposing. James spent the next 2 weeks doing something that 15 years of night work had taught him perfectly, being completely invisible while observing everything. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears about Victoria Sterling's situation. Dr. Patterson visited Wilson Carter's office 3 times a week, always carrying a brown medical briefcase that was never allowed to leave the office. During one of these visits, James accidentally left his cleaning cart too close to the half-open door and overheard fragments of a conversation that made his blood run cold. "The tests continue to show progressive cardiovascular deterioration," whispered Dr. Patterson, "but I'm keeping the official reports within normal parameters as agreed." "Perfect," replied Carter. "How much longer do you estimate with the medication I'm prescribing?" They thought he was just a janitor. They couldn't have been more wrong. James Washington, a night janitor at Sterling Industries for 15 years, was invisible to the powerful people whose offices he cleaned. But when he noticed the CEO, Victoria Sterling, showing subtle signs of poisoning disguised as stress, James' quiet vigilance set off a chain of events that would shake corporate America. His suspicions deepened when a friend, Marcus Johnson, a sharp Afghanistan veteran working as a maintenance tech, overheard Wilson Carter, the company's senior security manager, talking about buying Sterling stock before leadership changes he knew were coming. If Victoria died or was incapacitated, Carter would take temporary control and cash in. James realized this wasn't neglect. It was a conspiracy. And the vitamins Victoria had been taking were the weapon. A plan in the shadows. James turned to Marcus, whose military contacts knew surveillance and financial forensics. Together, they devised a simple but dangerous plan. Plant microphones and cameras in Carter's and Dr. Patterson's offices, record everything, then follow the money. In one quiet night, Marcus installed a surveillance network in 45 minutes that would have taken private investigators weeks. Within days, they captured a damning conversation, Carter and Dr. Patterson openly discussing how to increase Victoria's dosage to speed her decline. Carter even laughed. "The press will love it. Young CEO dies of executive stress." Perfect smokescreen. James listened 3 times, anger hardening into resolve. His late wife Dorothy had always said, "Knowledge without action is complicity. Arrogance meets justice." Over the next week, James and Marcus compiled 92 hours of recordings, forged medical documents, and financial evidence showing 341 suspicious stock trades timed with Victoria's medical episodes. Marcus' military accountant contacts made the case airtight, but James wanted Carter and Patterson to see who had beaten them. Phase 1. During a board meeting, James slipped Victoria a sealed note. "The vitamins aren't vitamins. Check the bottle. Someone who cares." She recognized the warning instantly. Phase 2. When Dr. Patterson visited for her weekly checkup, Victoria confronted him about testing the supplements. His panic was caught on a hidden camera while Marcus streamed it live to a surveillance van. Phase 3. As Patterson tried to talk her out of a second opinion, Marcus delivered the entire evidence package to the FBI, State Medical Board. And Chicago Tribune. Phase 4. On Friday evening, James personally briefed Victoria for 45 minutes, laying out every document and recording. The poised CEO's face hardened into icy fury. "James," she said, "you've saved my life 3 times, twice from medical emergencies, once from betrayal." The fall of Carter and Patterson. Saturday morning, Carter arrived at an emergency meeting, swagger intact until he walked into a room full of FBI agents and federal investigators. "Wilson," Victoria said coldly, "meet the people interested in your extracurricular activities." As agents read Carter his rights, his arrogance collapsed into panic. Dr. Patterson was arrested simultaneously while trying to wipe his computer. Both men were charged with attempted murder, securities fraud, and conspiracy. On Monday, the Chicago Tribune headline blazed, "Janitor Hero Exposes Corporate Murder Plot." Victoria publicly confirmed every detail and shocked the world by promoting James to Director of Corporate Safety and Integrity with a $200,000 salary. "Competence and integrity don't depend on degrees," she told the press. "They depend on character, and James Washington has it in spades." A new era at Sterling Industries. 6 months later, James sat in his 26th floor office overlooking Chicago. The janitor once pushed a cleaning cart through these halls. Now he led a 15-person fraud investigation unit with a $2 million budget. His friend Marcus was promoted to head of electronic security. In honor of Dorothy, Victoria created a scholarship program for low-income students pursuing neurology and emergency medicine. In 2 years, 120 students, many children of janitors and laborers, earned full medical scholarships. Meanwhile, Carter was serving 25 years in federal prison, stripped of his fortune and arrogance alike. Dr. Patterson, disgraced and broke, now sold medical equipment, banned from practicing medicine. Sterling Industries, rebuilt with strict ethics policies, became a national model, its stock price tripling under Victoria's leadership when the White House called for James to testify on corporate medical reform. It was just one more sign of how far he'd come. Books, documentaries, and lectures told his story. But the letters from ordinary workers meant the most. People inspired to trust their own knowledge and speak against injustice. Looking at Dorothy's photo on his desk, James reflected on the lesson Carter and Patterson learned too late. True intelligence doesn't come from a degree or a title. It comes from character, knowledge, and the courage to act. Today, when workers face discrimination, many ask themselves, what would James Washington do? The answer: observe, learn, document, act, and turn invisible courage into undeniable justice. If this story inspired you, subscribe for more true accounts proving that real power doesn't come from status. It comes from standing on the right side of the truth.